After being away for several months, I returned home, only to find that the house where I grew up was on the market. This was the house filled with my childhood memories, and now it was being sold without my consent. It was my husband, Stephen, and my mother-in-law, Betty, who orchestrated this sale. They both came from less affluent backgrounds and seemed to disregard the sentimental value of my family home, viewing it only as a means to a financial end. You see, when I had left, I did so with the understanding that while I was gone, my home would be respected. Instead, I was met with betrayal. Stephen and Betty not only sold the house, but also seemed to take joy in their deceit, knowing full well the emotional and legal repercussions that would follow from their breach of trust. Their actions were a stark violation not only of our legal agreement, but of the emotional ties I had with that place. The house wasn't just a structure, it was a repository of my family's love and memories, a physical connection to my parents, who had moved to another home for their retirement. The decision to sell the house came as a shock, especially since my parents had always shown nothing but affection toward Stephen, accepting him as their own. Despite our differing socioeconomic backgrounds, with me being from a family of business owners, and Stephen from a single-parent, modest upbringing, my family had supported our union without reservation. Now, as I confront this betrayal, I realize the weight of my parents' gesture when they decided to transfer the house to me, intending for it to be a sanctuary and support for our future endeavors. It was supposed to be a gift, a token of their love and trust. I've been with Stephen for over 7 years. We've shared a life from a young age. Our marriage was supposed to be a partnership of equals, irrespective of our financial status or family heritage. Yet here we are, at a juncture where those foundational values are being tested. As the rightful owner of the house, the responsibility to manage the fallout from this unfortunate sale lies with me. But the trust between Stephen, Betty, and me has been deeply eroded. As I deal with the legal and emotional consequences of their actions, I'm left pondering the future of our relationship and the house that once symbolized our shared dreams and aspirations. After deciding against having children, the large family home my parents had bequeathed to us felt overwhelmingly spacious. I expressed my gratitude to my parents for their generosity, and though the official transfer of ownership hadn't yet occurred, I had already begun negotiations with a real estate agent. During one hectic morning, I reminded Stephen to complete some necessary paperwork. "Stephen, I need you to fill out this form. It's due today and we won't make it in time otherwise." He shrugged off my urgency with a dismissive wave. "Just write it down then. You're overreacting. Submitting it today will be just fine." His response stung, a far cry from the considerate man I married. Lately, Stephen had grown indifferent, often leaving critical tasks to me. He seemed to expect me to handle important documents and other responsibilities, which I did, more to avoid family conflict than anything else. But this dynamic left me feeling less like a partner and more like a servant. Despite these challenges, we proceeded with selling our current home and even picked out a new, more suitable place to live. However, doubts about the future with Stephen clouded my thoughts. Then, one day, I received distressing news. My parents had been in a serious car accident. I rushed to the hospital and learned they would need 7 months to recover fully, with intensive care required for the first 3. Determined to support them, I negotiated with my employer to adjust my work schedule and informed Stephen that I would be staying with my parents to help. Stephen's response was nonchalant. "Okay, it's your thing." His tone detached, showing little concern for my parents' well-being. Relieved yet worried, I wondered how Stephen would manage daily life without me. His inability to perform even basic chores like laundry or remember to take out the trash gave me pause. Could I leave him on his own without our home turning into a mess? With reservations, I turned to my mother-in-law, Betty, explaining the situation and asking if she could keep an eye on Stephen while I was away. "Please make yourself at home and help out as you see fit," I urged her, hoping that with her support, Stephen would manage until I could return. "Oh, Margaret, You seem to be in quite the bind, aren't you? Betty said with a tone that dripped with condescension. I'm sure your parents could afford to hire some help. Or is it just that you're missing them too much? Don't worry about Stephen. I'll take good care of him. You take all the time you need with your parents, even if it's more than 6 months, she added, her voice laced with a sincerity that felt more like sarcasm. It was clear she saw me as the woman who had whisked her son away. I managed a strained thank you to Betty, hiding my irritation. At that moment, she was my only option for ensuring Stephen had any supervision. With just the essentials packed, I hurried off to care for my recovering parents. The 6 months I spent with them were hectic and flew by. My contact with Stephen during this period was minimal, but the time was well spent aiding in my parents' recovery. Once they were stable and no longer needed my constant presence, I felt a mix of relief and readiness to return to my own life. Driving back, the familiar scenery of our town welcomed me, but as I approached our house, a chilling sight greeted me. A for sale sign stood prominently on the lawn. Confused and alarmed, I immediately called Stephen, only to hear a chuckle on the other end before he casually dropped the bombshell. I sold the house and moved back in with my parents. I took care of everything while you were gone, he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. None of what Stephen said made sense, so I drove straight to my in-laws' house, a mere 10 minutes away. The first shock was the sight of my belongings piled up at their front door. As I processed this, a contractor arrived, rang the bell, exchanged some paperwork with Betty, and began loading my things into his truck. Stephen soon appeared, and both he and Betty looked unusually upbeat, dressed in fancy clothes and near a luxury car I didn't recognize. The scene was surreal as they counted a stack of money with gleeful expressions. Confronting Betty in a mix of shock and anger, I demanded, "What is going on here, Betty?" With a dismissive scoff, she replied, "I cleared out all that clutter from the house for you. You never knew how to manage your stuff, being too well off and all." Her words stung, and she continued, "You've been such a negligent wife, putting your parents before your husband. I feel sorry for Stephen, having to deal with a wife like you. That's why I even told him to divorce you." Stephen then coldly informed me that the house was now legally in my name, which Betty used to justify selling it. "Since you were the one who told me I could do whatever I wanted, I did just that," he explained, showing me the contract with the real estate company that was signed about a month ago. Betty then flashed a condescending smile, as if she had outsmarted me in some twisted game. The betrayal was overwhelming, not just the loss of the house, but the realization that the person I trusted most had orchestrated it all. In the turmoil, I managed to collect my thoughts and faced Betty, my voice steady despite my inner panic. "But the house should already be under contract with another real estate company, right? And if it's my house, any contract without my signature would be invalid. You did this without my permission, and now you've breached the contract. The real estate company will demand compensation." Betty retorted dismissively, "I heard from Stephen that it was you who dealt with another agency without consulting my son. That's not my concern. I simply did what you usually do, handling things independently." Her indifference to the legality of her actions was appalling. "So, if there's compensation to be paid, it should be by you. It's your own house," she shrugged nonchalantly. I turned to Stephen, seeking some form of support or understanding, only to find him mirroring his mother's sarcastic smile. "Finally, this day has come. This is revenge, you know," he began. His words cut deeper as he continued, "You've always mocked me for being poor. I've always felt like an outsider in your family, with its different standards and values. You and your parents probably found it amusing." His bitterness spilled over as he said, "Being poor isn't funny, is it? Now I'll show you what money can do. I'm not going to let you be the only one with a comfortable life." With that, Stephen handed me the divorce papers, all filled out except for my signature. I could have had my mom handle everything and submit these, but where's the revenge in that? The situation escalated dramatically, feeling almost like a scene from a movie where the tables were turned dramatically. Stephen and Betty were visibly satisfied, reveling in what they believed was a victorious moment. Yet, as their glee peaked, I felt my anger dissipate, replaced by a stark realization of their blunder. Look, I hate to break up your moment of triumph, but this house isn't mine anymore, I said calmly, a plan forming in my mind. You've made a huge mistake. You're the ones who will suffer the consequences, not me. Resolved to no longer protect them or hide their deceit, I decided it was time to expose everything. Their actions, driven by spite and a misconstrued sense of justice, would soon come back to haunt them. I was done covering for their mistakes. It was time for the truth to come to light. I reached into my bag and pulled out a document, unfolding it before Stephen and Betty. This is the official registry document for the house, I explained calmly. Remember our phone conversation the other day? Well, the ownership has been legally transferred to Stephen's name. With the accident my parents had, the process was delayed, but it was finalized just last week when you two decided to sell the house. Betty's face fell, confusion written all over it. I didn't hear anything about this. Of course you didn't, I responded. I tried calling to see if I should mail it to you, but you hardly listened and just told me to handle it. You probably don't even remember, but I double-checked with you if it was all right. Stephen stared at the registry document, his expression turning to one of disbelief and worry. Betty, equally shocked, confronted me. What are you saying? I continued. This was actually what my parents intended. They've always seen Stephen as their son and held you in high regard, Betty. They believed that giving us the house was not only a gesture of their love, but also a tribute to how well you raised Stephen. I let the weight of my words sink in. But this, what you've done, is a betrayal, not just to me, but to my parents' genuine intentions. Stephen and Betty looked visibly shaken, their hands trembling as they covered their mouths. As I mentioned, this mess involves 2 real estate agencies now. They will undoubtedly seek compensation for the breach of contract, I explained. I'll be in touch with the agency I originally signed with. I suggest you contact the agency you dealt with to sort this out on your own. Pausing, I looked at them both, disappointment clear in my tone. I can't believe the agency accepted such a hasty explanation and went ahead with the contract. If you had issues or opinions, you should have been upfront with me rather than resorting to deceit. It's not about being poor, it's about being honest and respectful. My frustration peaked, and my voice grew louder as I confronted Stephen and Betty. This isn't about money, it's about the poverty of your hearts, I declared firmly. In the heat of the moment, I pulled out my cell phone, intent on calling the real estate agency to report the deception, but just as I was about to dial, Stephen intervened, his voice desperate. Wait. This isn't what I wanted. I was just upset because you left. Let's try to sort this out together, as a couple. His next suggestion reeked of desperation and naivety. I know, I could buy the house that's currently on the market, call the old real estate agency, and we could pretend none of this ever happened. You're wealthy, so you could afford that, right? His plea was interrupted by Betty, who had been quietly seething beside him. Her fear of losing everything suddenly shifted her allegiances. Stephen, are you turning on me now? After I arranged everything for you? I can't believe you'd put your wife before your mother. What a heartless son. Her words, laced with irony, stung her back when I shot back. Oh, but according to what you said earlier, Betty, putting parents first is scummy, right? Then you should be glad Stephen isn't scum. You should be proud of him being such a fine son. Caught in her hypocrisy, Betty was left speechless. Stephen, sensing an opportunity, tried to win me over. Margaret, you're the most important person to me right now. I'm going to change my attitude and do my best. Please don't get me wrong. His words did little to sway me. No one said anything about forgiveness, I retorted as I brushed his hand away when he tried to take mine. I was completely disillusioned with his excuses and lack of responsibility. I'm already tired of your laziness, Stephen, and every time something goes wrong, you blame others and expect them to fix your problems. How can I trust you to change?" My final words to him were clear and harsh. "I'm not your secretary or your servant. As an adult, you should take responsibility for your actions. You will pay for this for the rest of your life, both you and Betty." With resolve, I took the divorce papers from Stephen's hand, stamped my signature right then and there, and left them standing in stunned silence. Following that tumultuous day, the divorce proceedings, though complicated, were eventually finalized. In a twist of irony, Stephen and Betty later sued my family, claiming they had been deceived by my parents and demanded compensation. The ordeal was far from over, but I was ready to face whatever came next with a clear conscience and a steadfast determination to protect my family's integrity. As expected, Stephen and Betty lost their lawsuit. Their underhanded tactics not only failed, but also left them financially responsible for significant compensation to both real estate agencies involved. The aftermath of their actions spiraled into a blame game between them, suggesting a long and troubled road ahead. Meanwhile, my employer had kindly arranged for me to continue working remotely, allowing me to stay with and support my parents during their recovery. Returning to my parents' place has been a grounding experience. Each day we navigate their rehabilitation together, sharing small but meaningful gestures of care. "Your bath is ready," my father tells me, a simple kindness after a long day. "Thank you," I reply. "I'll wash the dishes, so you go ahead and relax first. You must be tired after today's rehab." "No, you first, Margaret," he insists. "I'll clean the tub later anyway. Go on, take a moment for yourself." Living with them again, I witness the unwavering support they have for each other, even as they continue to recover from the accident. It's in these quiet, everyday interactions that I've come to realize what was fundamentally absent in my marriage to Stephen: mutual respect and consideration. Initially, the divorce brought a wave of sadness and frustration, yet watching my parents, I understand more clearly what a loving and supportive relationship looks like. I've learned valuable lessons about respect, communication, and the kind of partnership I desire. If I ever decide to open my heart again, I'll be much more cautious, armed with the insights gained from this ordeal. I'm determined not to cause any more worry for my mom and dad. Instead, I'm focused on applying these lessons to my life moving forward and continuously expressing my gratitude to my parents. This new chapter at my parents' home isn't just about recovery. It's about starting anew, fortified by the wisdom gained from past experiences and a renewed appreciation for the family who has always stood by me.